In the summer of 1956, the quiet desert stretch between Reno and the California border was the kind of place where the horizon shimmered in the heat and the wind carried nothing but dust. This was not a road made for the impatient. The two-lane ribbon cut through the Nevada emptiness, past low hills bleached by the sun and telephone poles leaning like weary sentinels. Anna sat in the passenger seat of her mother's faded green Chevy, tracing her fingertip along the edge of the rolled-down window. 16 and restless, she had the look of someone already dreaming about the coast. The California move had been her mother's idea. A new start, with Gary the boyfriend who drove too fast and laughed too loudly. They had been driving for hours when the needle on the gas gauge dipped into the red. The Chevy rattled into a dusty lot where a hand-painted sign read, "Frank's Gas and Service." A single fuel pump stood in the middle, like an old sentry, the paint flaking away in the sun. The building behind it was squat with peeling green trim and a glass front clouded by years of desert grit. Anna's mother climbed out first, calling for Gary, who was somewhere inside rifling through the trunk. Anna lingered by the pump, squinting at the heat haze. A small spiral notebook lay half buried in the dust near the pump island. The cover was worn soft, the edges curled. She bent to pick it up and turned it in her hands. Inside, a page bore only a date, July 14th, 1956, and a single sentence written in cramped, slanted script. "Don't let her leave." It meant nothing to Anna in that moment. She closed it and slipped it into her bag. Somewhere behind the grimy glass, a man stepped into the light. Middle-aged, broad-shouldered, his hair slicked back in a style that belonged to another decade. He watched her from behind the counter, his eyes unblinking. She felt the first cool edge of unease, then though she couldn't have said why. The desert was full of strangers. And strangers, she told herself, were only dangerous in stories. The door to Frank's Gas and Service gave a metallic groan as Anna stepped inside the air cooler, but thick with the smell of oil and old paper. Rows of dusty shelves lined the small shop, stacked with fan belts, road maps, and glass bottles of soda, sweating in the dim light. Behind the counter stood the man she had seen through the glass. Frank. He wore a khaki work shirt with his name embroidered in red thread above the pocket sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows. His smile came slowly, stretching too far, the kind of smile that looked practiced in a mirror. "You folks headed west." His voice was low, a little gravelly. He kept his gaze fixed on Anna, even as her mother asked for a full tank. Anna nodded without speaking, letting her eyes drift toward the cooler. She felt the weight of his stare, a slow, deliberate measure, like someone considering the grain of wood before carving it. He moved with unhurried precision, ringing up the sale, wiping his hands on a rag, sliding a soda bottle across the counter toward her without asking if she wanted one. "On the house," he said, the corners of his mouth lifting again. "Not many girls your age come through here. Town's quiet." From outside came the sound of Gary slamming the trunk shut, followed by the hum of the pump. Anna twisted the soda cap and took a sip, the sweetness sharp against her tongue. Her mother was already at the door, distracted by a map she'd unfolded. Frank leaned forward slightly. "California's not all it's cracked up to be. Folks get lost out there." It was an odd thing to say to a stranger. She felt an urge to step back, but her mother's voice cut through, calling her to the car. Frank's eyes lingered one beat too long before he turned to wipe the counter. As Anna stepped into the sunlight, the heat rushed over her again, but the cool trace of that gaze clung to her skin like a shadow. She didn't notice the small notebook still in her bag, the one with the strange message pressing lightly against her side. The sound of the pump clicking off echoed in the still air. Anna's eyes caught movement along the side of the station, where the sun gave way to a narrow strip of shade. Leaning against the dented metal of an old ice chest was a man she hadn't noticed before, tall, wiry, his shoulders slouched in a way that suggested the weight of long roads behind him. His clothes were travel-worn, faded jeans, a thin plaid shirt with one cuff frayed open and a canvas duffel slumped at his feet. He flicked a cigarette into the dirt, the ember winking out, then tilted his head toward her with a half-smile. "Long trip?" he asked. His voice was light, but his eyes, pale and sharp, studied her closely. Anna hesitated before answering. "California," she said. "That's a place to start fresh," he replied, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "Name's Pete." He stuck his hands in his pockets, glancing toward the horizon. Not much out here but sand and people looking to get somewhere else. From the car, Gary's voice carried over sharp with impatience. "Anna, let's go." Pete smirked faintly. "Your old man's in a hurry. He's not my—" She stopped herself. It wasn't worth explaining. Pete pushed away from the ice chest and stepped into the light. "Watch yourself out there," he said. "Some roads take you where you don't want to go." His tone was casual, but something in his gaze seemed to suggest more a flicker of knowledge, or maybe just the jaded edge of someone who had seen too much. Before Anna could respond, her mother called again. She turned to go, but when she looked back, Pete was already walking toward the far side of the lot, his duffel swinging at his side. Later, she would remember the way his shadow stretched long across the dirt, and how in the heat haze it seemed to fade into the earth itself. She wouldn't know until much later that Pete left town that very night, vanishing as easily as he had appeared. The Chevy's door groaned as Anna climbed in the vinyl seat, searing from the sun. Gary slid behind the wheel, the smell of gasoline clinging to his shirt. He didn't start the car right away. Instead, he stared through the windshield toward the station's side wall where Pete had been standing moments before. Who was that? His voice was calm, but the muscles in his jaw worked tight beneath the skin. Anna shrugged. "Just a man asking where we were headed." Gary's fingers drummed once on the steering wheel, then stilled. "You don't talk to men like that on the road. You don't know what they're after." He shifted into gear, abruptly pulling out of the lot, the tires kicking up a small cloud of dust. Her mother unfolded the road map across her lap, tracing the route with one finger. "We'll stop in Carson City before the pass," she murmured, as though the conversation between Anna and Gary hadn't just hardened the air inside the car. The road unwound ahead in long, empty miles. Gary drove fast, one arm hooked over the top of the steering wheel, the other resting close to Anna's side on the bench seat. Every so often, she caught him glancing in the rearview mirror, though there was nothing behind them but a shrinking smudge of the gas station. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the asphalt. Anna leaned her forehead against the cool edge of the window. She thought about Pete's warning. Some roads take you where you don't want to go. She wasn't sure if he'd meant California or something else entirely. They stopped at a roadside diner an hour later. Gary's hand on her shoulder lingered a moment too long as he guided her inside. To anyone watching, it might have looked protective. To Anna, it felt like a lock turning in place. When they returned to the car, he opened the passenger door for her, but didn't step back, forcing her to brush past him. He smiled faintly, but his eyes remained cold. Anna told herself it was just his way, that some people were built out of sharp edges. Still, she didn't sleep much that night. The motel was the kind that sat low and flat against the road, its neon sign flickering with a tired pulse. They took 2 adjoining rooms, Gary and her mother in one, Anna in the other. The air smelled faintly of mildew and cigarettes long since smoked. Anna lay on top of the bedspread, the hum of the swamp cooler masking the occasional rumble of a truck passing outside. Through the thin wall, muffled voices rose and fell, her mother's tired tone. Gary's sharper replies. She closed her eyes, willing herself to drift away. Somewhere near midnight, she woke to silence. The cooler had stopped. The air felt heavier, warmer. She reached for the window, pushing it open to let the night air in. Outside the parking lot glowed dim under a lone street lamp, the desert stretching dark beyond. A shadow moved near the edge of the lot. At first she thought it was Gary, but the figure was too tall, too lean. It paused, then motioned for her to come closer. She hesitated, her bare feet cooling against the linoleum. Something about the stillness of the gesture drew her. She slipped on her shoes and stepped outside. The night smelled of sage and distant rain. The figure was already moving toward the far side of the lot, beyond the light's reach. She followed each step, quieter than the last. At the edge of the gravel, she stopped. Whoever it was had vanished into the dark. She turned to go back and saw movement again, this time near the highway. A voice low and urgent called her name. The next morning, her mother woke to an open window and an empty bed. Anna's shoes were gone. The door was locked from the inside. The police were called. They searched the lot, the diner across the road, the dusty highway shoulders. Frank claimed he'd seen nothing after they'd left. Pete was gone. Gary's story was that he'd slept through the night. No one could explain how Anna had disappeared without a sound. 30 years later, in the spring of 1986, the Nevada high country was still capable of keeping its secrets. Snowmelt ran cold along the edges of dirt roads, and the pines creaked in the wind like an old house shifting in its sleep. Joe Miller, a long-haul trucker taking a rare week off, had driven his pickup up a narrow forest track looking for a quiet place to fish. The trail ended in a clearing no larger than a front yard. At its centre squatted a weather-beaten cabin, its roof sagging, the boards silvered by decades of sun. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges, the windows clouded with dust from the inside. Joe wasn't the sort to spook easily. Still, something about the place held him at the tree line for a long moment. The air was heavy here still, as if the forest itself leaned in to listen. He stepped onto the porch. The wood flexed faintly under his weight. The smell met him first. Dry, rot old paper and something faint but sour, like a memory of decay. Inside, the dim light caught on cobwebs stretched from rafter to rafter. The single room was littered with objects. A suitcase tipped open, spilling a faded summer dress. A compact mirror with a spiderweb crack. And on the small table, a glass bottle of soda still capped its label, bleached almost white. He moved deeper in boots, stirring decades of dust. In one corner stood a narrow iron bed frame, the mattress sunken in the middle. A pair of shoes sat neatly beneath it, their leather cracked, but carefully aligned as if waiting for feet that never returned. It was the suitcase that held him. The initials AM were faintly visible on a paper luggage tag, edges curled. Inside were clothes from another time, a hairbrush tangled with long dark strands, and a small spiral notebook, the cover soft with wear. On the first page, in cramped, slanted script, "Don't let her leave." Joe stepped back out into the clearing, the notebook heavy in his hand. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been an accident. He would call the sheriff before the day was over. The cabin became a sealed scene within hours, sheriff's deputies pacing the clearing while the wind stirred pine needles against the roof. Dust masks hung loose over their faces, but nothing could soften the sour-sweet odor seeping from the air inside. Investigators moved slowly, cataloguing each relic. Anna's suitcase was logged first, its contents photographed, each item tagged. Beneath a folded blouse, an envelope lay brittle with age. Inside were black and white photographs, their edges curled and silvering with time. The images were jarring. Anna stood in the first frame, her shoulders tense, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the camera. In another, she sat on the iron bed, hands folded in her lap, the same summer dress appearing again and again, as if days or weeks had passed without change. The background never varied the same wall, the same narrow window, with a curtain drawn halfway. The photographer's shadow appeared in several shots, long and angled, never revealing a face. But one detail caught a deputy's attention. On the table beside Anna, in nearly every photograph, was a bottle of soda identical to the one still capped in the cabin. Frank's name came up almost immediately. Locals remembered the gas station, the way he'd linger over conversations with young women, the complaints that had never quite made it to formal charges. He'd died in the early 70s, but the pattern was enough to draw suspicion toward him. The idea that he could have brought Anna here, kept her in this cabin, seemed plausible. Still, there were gaps. The cabin was far from the gas station, too far to move someone unnoticed. And none of the photographs showed Frank's unmistakable bulk or the slicked hair he never seemed to abandon. A deputy noted another oddity, the Bible on the shelf above the bed. It was small, the leather worn thin, and inside the front cover, a neat inscription read, "To Anna from Aunt Ruth." At first it was dismissed as sentimental clutter, something she might have carried with her from home. Outside, the sun dipped lower, the shadows lengthening across the clearing. Inside, the photographs lay in neat rows on the table, the captured moments frozen in grain and shadow, waiting for someone to see what was truly there. Old case files were pulled from the sheriff's archive, their folders yellowing, paper clips rusting in place. Pete's name surfaced in more than one. Witness statements from 1956 described him as a drifter who appeared suddenly in town, spent the better part of the afternoon lingering near the station, and then vanished the night Anna disappeared. A highway patrol log noted a man matching his description hitching west toward Fallon that same evening. Another report, dated weeks later, from a small town in eastern California, mentioned a tall stranger with a canvas duffel seen talking to a teenage waitress who didn't show up for work the next day. That case had gone nowhere, swallowed by jurisdictional lines and thin evidence. The chain of coincidence was compelling. Pete's sudden departure after speaking with Anna seemed more than chance. Investigators imagined him coaxing her toward the edge of the motel lot, slipping into the dark before anyone noticed. The photographs from the cabin could fit the theory: an isolated spot, a man who lived by the road skilled at vanishing. But the timeline was strained. The cabin was far from Pete's last known direction of travel, deep in terrain that didn't lead west. And if he had taken her, why keep her so close to the area where she'd disappeared? Still, the story hardened in the public mind. The shadow in the photographs could easily be him, tall, thin, standing just far enough from the frame to remain a silhouette. Rumours about other girls lost along his path filled in the rest. A retired deputy recalled searching for Pete after Anna's disappearance, checking bus stations and truck stops, but every lead dissolved. It's like he could smell the search coming, he'd said. The photographs went back into evidence boxes. Pete's file stayed on top, and the Bible with Ruth's inscription remained in a separate bag, unremarked upon except as a personal belonging. It was easier to believe in the drifter, someone transient, rootless, dangerous. Easier than to imagine the same danger growing quietly from someone with a family name. Gary's name had never fully left the case file. His connection to Anna was complicated, neither father nor stepfather, yet positioned close enough to exert control. Interviews from 1956 painted a man quick to anger, especially when Anna resisted his directives. In the days after her disappearance, his account had been simple. He'd slept through the night, heard nothing, saw nothing. The locked door to Anna's room was to him proof she'd slipped away by choice. But deputies noted the way his eyes shifted when pressed on where he had been between midnight and 2 a.m. A gap he filled with vague references to getting air outside. In 1986, a surviving relative agreed to speak. She remembered a tense family dinner just weeks before the trip west. Gary had argued with Anna's mother over that girl's attitude and warned that California would ruin her the rest of the way. His tone, she recalled, was more than protective. It was proprietorial. The relative also remembered seeing Gary a week after Anna vanished. He had fresh scratches on his forearm, which he claimed were from working on the car. When asked about Anna, he'd shrugged, saying, "She'll turn up when she learns her place." In the present, the reopened investigation considered him again. Could jealousy over Pete's brief conversation with Anna have escalated? Could he have followed her from the motel room, confronted her, and hidden her in some remote place? The cabin's photographs were studied anew. Gary was a stockier man than the shadow in the images, but perspective could play tricks. And the soda bottles, though familiar from Frank's station, could have been carried from anywhere. Gary had died in 1978, leaving no chance for a confession. His record showed no arrests for violence, but those who'd known him spoke of his temper in careful tones. Still, nothing placed him directly in the cabin. No fingerprints, no personal items. The Bible, with Aunt Ruth's neat inscription, remained untouched in its evidence sleeve, dismissed as an artifact from before the trip. The investigation had its suspects, but the truth was still somewhere else hidden, as it had always been behind a quieter face. The Bible had been handled only once, during the evidence sweep, its pages carefully fanned to check for concealed notes or pressed photographs. It was small enough to fit in a coat pocket, the black leather worn smooth at the edges, its spine soft from years of use. On the inside cover, in tidy blue ink, was written, "To Anna from Aunt Ruth. May you always walk in his light." The handwriting was steady, deliberate, without a trace of hesitation. At the time, it drew no suspicion. Aunts gave gifts. Religious aunts gave Bibles. Investigators assumed Anna had carried it from home, a sentimental tether to family during the upheaval of the move west. But in the sheriff's office basement, where the reopened case files were spread across a long table, a junior investigator lingered over it longer than most. The inscription was dated the summer of 1956, just weeks before Anna disappeared. That meant Ruth had given it to her after learning about the planned move to California, the very change she'd openly opposed. Ruth's name was scarcely mentioned in the original file. She lived several towns away, described by neighbours as quiet and devout, a woman who kept to herself. In interviews, she had been polite, but offered little grieving, she said, and eager to let the police do their work. The Bible's presence in the cabin had no neat explanation. None of the primary suspects, Frank, Pete or Gary, had reason to place it there. No one questioned how it might have travelled hundreds of miles from Ruth's home to a hidden cabin in the pines. The investigator made a note in the margin. If Ruth never went west, how did her Bible end up here? It was a question that at first seemed peripheral, just another loose end in a case full of them. But once written down, it stayed. The more the team returned to the photographs, the suitcase, the soda bottle, the more the Bible seemed less like a relic and more like a whisper from the centre of the truth. And it would be the one object that, when revisited, began to shift the entire story. It was the Bible that finally broke the long stalemate of suspicion. When the junior investigator traced its journey, the quiet figure of Aunt Ruth began to emerge from the edges of the case file. In 1956, Ruth had been living alone after her husband's death. Her days marked by church services, scripture study, and volunteer work at the parish. She had been vocal about her disapproval of Anna's move to California, warning her sister, Anna's mother, that cities like that devour young girls. In a letter recovered from an old family trunk, Ruth's words were sharper. "If you take her there, you'll lose her soul before she's grown." Records showed Ruth had withdrawn a large sum from her savings account the week before Anna disappeared. Neighbours remembered seeing her pack her sedan and leave before dawn, saying only that she was visiting family. Piecing it together, investigators saw the shape of her plan. Ruth had followed them west, unnoticed, arriving in the small Nevada town within a day of their stop at Frank's station. In the confusion of the motel's layout and the shadowy figure drawing Anna outside, Ruth had been waiting someone familiar enough not to alarm her niece. Someone able to coax her toward the edge of the lot without force. The cabin was Ruth's. It had been left to her by a cousin, long unused, but still stocked with furniture and blankets. She had brought Anna there under the conviction she was saving her from corruption. In Ruth's mind, the isolation was protection, the rigid rules a path back to purity. But Anna had grown ill in the weeks that followed. The photographs, stiff, repetitive, were Ruth's way of documenting that she was keeping watch. The soda bottles were rewards, the dress the only one Ruth allowed her to wear. When Anna died, likely from untreated illness or malnutrition, Ruth buried her in a shallow grave somewhere in the pines. The site was never found. She returned home and resumed her life of piety, carrying the secret until her death in 1984. The truth, when laid bare, was colder than the rumors about Frank or Pete or Gary. The danger hadn't come from the road, but from family, the kind that smiled and prayed while locking the door. By the time the truth was confirmed, Ruth had been gone for 2 years, buried in the churchyard of her small hometown. Her grave bore a simple stone name, dates, and the verse, "The Lord is my shepherd." There was no hint of the life she had taken. The cabin was burned down by order of the county. Too unstable to preserve it, went up in a quiet, controlled fire, the smoke drifting between the pines before dissolving into the wide Nevada sky. The land was left to reclaim itself, grass pushing through the ash saplings, twisting toward the light. No one ever found Anna's grave. Without remains, there would be no headstone, no place for flowers. Her name lived only in the reopened case file, in a box of evidence now sealed again, the cracked mirror, the photographs, the suitcase, the Bible. For those who had chased other suspects for decades, the revelation left an emptiness almost as sharp as grief. Frank had been a predator, but not here. Pete had likely been only a wanderer moving on because that was his nature. Gary's jealousy had been real, but not the cause of Anna's end. Each man's shadow had been long enough to hide the smaller, quieter figure behind it. As they closed the file, the lead investigator looked once more at the Bible, its leather still faintly scented with dust and age. Evil had not come to Anna as a stranger. It had worn a face she trusted, a voice she knew, and hands that believed they were shaping her salvation. As they left the evidence room, he looked at the box one last time. The real journey was just beginning. In the end, that was the lesson: evil might hide behind familiar faces, but truth endures. As they moved toward the sunlit hall, he squeezed his partner's hand. She never even saw it coming. No one ever does. They stepped toward healing, toward a future they would build one day at a time.
Thank you for listening to Brody's Stories. Until we meet again.